You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This is another show about perpetual travel. And I'm really pleased to have a special guest, a listener of the show, who's currently based in Thailand and an entrepreneur with a lot of very interesting experience in both entrepreneurship and perpetual travel. It's David Kahn. Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Jake, hello. I'm getting such a kick out of having you done an intro so many times on podcasts that I've listened to and enjoyed. And now that I'm on the other end of one of those is very amusing for me.
Awesome. Great. So you're currently in Thailand, is that right?
That is correct. We're in the central northern area of Thailand. It's an area called Chiang Mai, the second largest city in Thailand and used to be the capital of Thailand.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of digital nomads end up in Chiang Mai as a kind of good place to be.
Yeah, I think for people who like the various benefits of living in Thailand, but don't want the massive stimulation that can be Bangkok, I think that everyone else finds their way either here or down to Phuket.
Awesome. So just as a bit of background, can you say a little bit about how you got into this lifestyle of perpetual travel?
Yeah. So there's different ways that I can come at that, but I'll presume that some of them will cover with other questions. And what I'll tell you about is what led to this most recently. So in 4 years ago, my wife and I were sitting on a couch at some friend's house. It was New Year's Eve, and we were having a really interesting conversation with the group where we were all kind of challenging each other, not just to come up with New Year's resolutions, but to declare to each other how we are going to live an extraordinary life, an extraordinary year ahead of us, and then to be accountable for living that. And my wife and I had discussed that we wanted to do some things that were a bit different from how we were practicing doing things in life previously. And one of those things was to live internationally, to live somewhere else. And so it was that night on the couch, my wife and I looked each other in the eye, and after a short conversation about it, we shook hands and agreed that 6 months later, the United States would no longer be our home.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was quite you can imagine how powerful that evening was. And when we got back to the group and we shared with them what our intention was, people were blown away. So, and us more than anyone, I'm sure. So we then continued to sell and give away and store everything that we had previously accumulated. And that was a lot. We had a 5,000 square foot home in Colorado, and all the rooms were furnished. And it takes a lot of time and money and energy to accumulate the things that we accumulate.
Right.
And there's a lot of learning that happens when you de-accumulate, when you get rid of those things. And so that was a powerful time in our life there. And then just briefly, we decided not to live in one place for too long. We knew we were going to eventually come back to the U.S. to give the children continuity in their high school years.
Right.
And so we had a certain window of 6 years, and we decided to change countries, actually to change continents with some regularity. So in the 6 year period, we are planning to, we either have or will have lived on 5 different continents and then find our way home.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So how long are you tending to stay in one place then? Is it a matter of like 6 months or a year, or is it shorter than that?
It's been no less than a year and no more than 2 years.
Right. So it's like that you're really getting a chance to experience living somewhere and kind of staying put for a good chunk of time, and then but also moving on and seeing other places too.
Yeah, partially that's the point. Is we don't want to be tourists. We want to have the cultural immersion that's possible only when you live somewhere, and we want to have the life lessons that can come of that. So part of that is the choice, and part of it is necessity, because we are not homeschooling. We're not tooled or skilled or motivated to homeschool ourselves. And we don't have the kind of wealth to bring a homeschool tutor around the world with us. So instead, we are sending the kids to international or local schools everywhere that we go. And so it's not practical to jump around too often when you have kids and you're doing that.
Right. So the kids are spending like a year in a school, or maybe 2 years or whatever, and then you move to another place and find another international school, and they're going into that school in the new place.
You got it.
Right. And how are the kids finding that experience? Because I'm asking because, we don't have kids yet, but this is one of the aspects of international travel or permanent travel that strikes me as one of the sort of practical challenges. And so, but also on the other hand, I think it could be a really amazing experience. So, how are they finding it?
Well, I could give you my version, and my perception is probably worth something because I know them pretty well. But if you're not satisfied, you let me know, and I'll go get them, and they'll join the call. But my version is the kids have learned to be very adaptable, and we can see that in many positive ways. It's not showing up in the, we've always been aware of the messages that kids need continuity, and we believe that's true in many areas. So we were mindful of that the whole time, and we've made sure that the kids have had the things that we can offer them in order to not yield any of the dysfunctions that this kind of lifestyle might cause for a child. They're not having that experience. It's not something that we even needed to be concerned about. Our kids, my oldest son, 11 years old, is happier than he's ever been. He's really found his place in the world. He's going to a school right now that is an international school, but only 5% of that international community is non-Asian.
Right.
So 95% is Asian, which is such an amazing cultural experience. And even in that environment, he's as happy as he is. My younger son, and this is something that we've learned, my younger son is 9. We've learned that any country that we go to, each of us is subject to it being our favorite place, and each of us is subject to it being our least favorite place.
Right.
And my younger son, he doesn't love being in Thailand. He loved our last home, which is in Barcelona.
Right.
And to make sure I'm staying on point with the question, each time we move, we make sure that the kids can stay in touch through Facebook and Clash of Clans and whatever other mediums we have, Skype, of course, to stay in touch with the friends that they've made. And by now, they really do have a sense that they are building a global community of friends. Right.
Cool. Well, let me ask you a little bit about the sort of financing of this lifestyle. I know your background is as an entrepreneur, and you've had a lot of experience with your own businesses. So, what was your route to being able to sort of finance this way of living?
So, my background was technology. That's what my degree was in, and probably leaned more towards business in terms of my practical use of the skills. But I developed something of a packaged version of me with a reputation around business and being somewhat serious and still always planning for the future, but having worked at Accenture and PricewaterhouseCoopers and doing some work for the Department of Defense, I had gotten a pretty, I don't know, I just felt more serious than the kid in me felt I should be. And so I started a business now called Delta Enterprise Solutions. At the time, we were called Interdyne Colorado. And it's a business that deals with complex problems for our clients, solving them with a suite of products that Microsoft manufactures. The products are called Dynamics products, and they are ERP and CRM products, acronyms that I won't bore your community with a definition of. So when I built it, having known that I wanted to get rid of that packaged version of me, and in order for me to do that, I needed to be rid of the business identity around me, I started thinking about how to build a business that didn't need me. And I made it some way through the building of the business on my own doing that, but then someone recommended a book to me that was extremely helpful and motivating, a book called E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Oh, yes.
Have you read it? I'm curious.
I have, and I think it's a great book. I read the E-Myth Revisited, which I think is just like a later edition of the same book.
Sure. And I think it might have actually been the revisited version that I had read.
Right.
And I don't think you've done it. It would be a great book for your show if you wound up being able to get an interview with Michael Gerber, or even just to have a panel discussion. But E-Myth was instrumental to me. It gave me a language and some validation for what I was trying to do to create a business that can operate without me. And so every single thing that I did in the business, I always asked myself, am I doing this in a way that is going to free me from being able to do it in the future? And so that means building processes and training and documentation and technology and workflow, building those things so that after I'm done doing it the first time, it's got those in place so that others can do it in the future.
Right.
And that's what I did. Buenos Aires, Argentina was the pilot to see if I could be physically separated from the company. And then Barcelona, Spain was the pilot to see if I could not be a day-to-day contributor to the company. And so far that is working. That's
awesome. So you've managed to turn your business into effectively passive income for yourself, because you've managed to proceduralize and sort of put operational processes in place so much that the business is functioning without you having to be in there constantly steering things.
That's exactly right.
Right. And I do think, by the way, that is a great book for anyone to read if they're interested in that particular question of how to do that, how to really turn your business into something that is effectively run without you. He calls it in the book, working on your business rather than in your business, and I think that's a really great perspective. And so, just because I think that's really helpful for people to hear about, how long did it take you when you mentioned that you were very conscious about that process? How long did it take you to get from the point where you're actively involved in day to day to the point where you now effectively you have a sort of passive income business that you're not having to intervene in?
It's an interesting question, or the way I'm going to answer might be unintuitive. First of all, the exact number of years was, I think it was 8 or 9 years to build my business.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't 8 or 9 years to put all the processes and technology and so on in place, But, as part of growing a business, you're faced with all sorts of challenges, and hiring the right salespeople and finding someone who can run the business in the way that you would want them to run it, and so on. So a lot of that time was just building a business.
Yeah.
And it would be hard for me to say how much of that time was allocated to building a business that is repeatable and doesn't need me. The interesting part, though, the thing that might be unexpected in my answer is, as I was doing those very intentional steps of making a business that had all of these rigors in place, I wasn't just thinking about those rigors for this company. I was thinking about, how can I do this here and now in a way that I can leverage them for any future company that I build.
Right.
And so if and when, it's probably more of a when than an if, I am venturing into something new, I believe I will be able to draw upon a vast amount of tools and data and so on to be able to make another company that can run itself with jumpstart from the get-go.
Yeah. That I'm sure you will, and that's a really interesting perspective. I think you're absolutely right. It's actually, having asked the question, I realized that it's kind of part of the entrepreneurial process anyway, to extract yourself from operations as fast as you can from day one. So it's sort of, as you say, part of building a business. But I think what's interesting about your story is that a lot of people who are following the kind of digital nomad lifestyle have businesses which are selling relatively simple online informational products, like ebooks or other kinds of downloadable stuff like that. And it sounds like you've actually managed to turn something that was more of a IT consultancy business, by the sound of it, into something that's passive income, which is a more complex thing to do. But it's interesting to see that it's possible to turn that kind of business into a passive income business too. Is that right? Is that what your business was?
It absolutely is, and it's such a cool observation, because I've not even made that observation. That's fascinating. Yes, it would be so much easier to run a business that is entirely online. My business is almost entirely in person, right? Face to face, geographically relevant. And I can speak to some of the ways that I've made that possible in my business, if that's what you want me to do.
Yeah, go for it. That would be really interesting.
So we live in a very different life, in a different world than the one that you and I grew up in. Having the internet, having globalization, the offshore outsourcing opportunities from consultants and even assistants, which I heard you talk about on a Tim Ferriss episode. I do that extensively. I use offshore resources for a lot of things like that. And even having clients internationally open up a lot of doors. And so one of the ways that we do it, unlike most companies that hire a bunch of people, and there's almost a pride, I think, that we have as companies for having a lot of people or having a lot of revenue or something like that. For me, operating the leanest, most effective organization and the simplest is, to some extent, the goal, and I'm very motivated towards it. So the way I do it is I have a core team that handles all of the main things that we do, and then I have some consultants on staff who do pre-sales and who do architecture work and things that really benefit from having them internal on your team. But when I have a client with a need, that client can show up anywhere in the country and occasionally anywhere in the world. And so what I do is, as soon as that client expresses a need, we try to meet their unique need geographically, functionally, product module-wise, et cetera, language, by working with a large community of independent consultants around the world. We've established a very vast network of resources who specialize in all different areas, and even dipping into our competitors. So we will call on our competitors, and what we do is we cherry pick from those resources to bring together the most relevant team that is physically present for the client. And it's a really interesting thing that I didn't plan on being the case, but when you look at what traditional companies do, they put the person who's on the bench, who's not engaged at another project, on your project. And that's whether or not the person's got the right skill set. We don't have people sitting on the bench. We're instead looking for that right person for your project who is in your area. And so our customers seem to give us the feedback that they get a much more relevant team to their project needs than they've had with competitors.
Right, yeah, because you don't have a vast sort of staff of underutilized people who you need to try and put somewhere. I mean, that's, I guess, the motivation that's forcing large companies to do that, is that they feel like they've got to try and get value out of the people who they've got on the payroll. But if you're more flexible and you have like consultants and people who are working abroad for you and stuff like that, then you can be a lot more picky about getting the right people in, rather than just putting whoever's available in.
That's exactly right. And you pay a little bit more, you make a little less profit, because these are typically more experienced people who can charge you higher bill rates, or they wouldn't be able to run their business independently. Or you're paying a competitor, so there's overhead in that. So you take a little less profit there, but I think you, on the flip side, you save enough in overhead costs for not having them on your payroll and in your benefits and so on, and on not having any underutilization costs where they're not engaged and you're still paying them a salary.
Right. Well, I think that's a really interesting experience for people to hear about, that, you know, you don't have to just be doing simple informational products. You can actually create a passive income business even out of a direct face-to-face consultancy, which is a really interesting approach. And so I want to come back to asking you a bit more about your life now, and your sort of experience of perpetual travel or long-term travel. One of the things that I'm interested in is some of the kind of practical barriers, like things like residency and stuff like that. Obviously, you know, this all gets a little bit more complicated if you're not just based in your country of origin, and there are different approaches to this. And some people just move country to country before their tourist visa runs out, but other people are kind of settling in one place. What's your approach to this? Is your whole family becoming residents in these different countries as you move through, or how are you doing it?
No, I would love if the countries were that generous with us to give us that easy residence. In each country, it is different. And again, this is a lot easier than it used to be. There are many countries, such as Argentina and Thailand, two of the places that we've lived. And ironically, or maybe unexpectedly, that was not a factor in our motivation to live in either place. We didn't know this would be the case. But in both of these places, you just leave the country every 3 months. Right. And they let you back in an hour later, a day later at most. And then you start your 3-month period over, and you can do that sometimes indefinitely, sometimes for a year or 2 years, depending on the country. So that's just the story of Argentina and Spain. In other countries, if you have enough wealth, you can demonstrate it, and they'll give you a retirement visa, just to say thank you for spending money in their country and not taking someone's job to do so. I don't think tourist visas would be relevant to the way we're doing it. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm not a total authority in this area.
But it sounds like you have to pretty much look at the country that you want to go to and just, adapt to local circumstances or whatever you can do, so to speak.
Absolutely. And the data's all out there. The data's all on the internet for you to get all of your questions answered, to be able to figure it out. But so far, we have not been... I don't believe that there are many countries on the planet that if we set our sights on it, we wouldn't be able to present the case. Whether they accept it is always, there's some degree of wild card, but where we couldn't present a case that meets their qualifications. Right.
And how much are you finding the hassle factor in terms of going through the sort of bureaucracy to get those kind of things done? Is this something that, once you've taken care of it, it's done and you don't think about it for the next year, or has it been a lot of hassle, or what's it like?
After the first hassle can be monumental. I don't want to understate that. Depending on the country, some countries make it very difficult, and Argentina was one of those. And completely illogical, which can be even more frustrating.
Right.
But once it's done, it's done. Once it's done, there may be some incremental things that you need to do, but they're not substantial. That's been our experience so far.
I can
imagine.
And
then in other countries like Thailand, we submitted our application, which probably took us hours, not days, to assemble. And we got a phone call, and they asked us a couple of questions, and they were like, "Oh, okay, then we'll give you this kind of visa." And that was it. Like, we had the visa. So we don't even have to do the every 3-month thing because we were able to get residency.
Right. Yeah,
not citizenship, but residency.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can imagine the Argentinian ones being illogical and weird. I remember when we went to Argentina, we had to declare what kind of cell phones we had. I was thinking, what has that got to do with anything? They obviously have some kind of import quota on cell phones or something like that. But so I can imagine if you want to be a resident there for longer, then you probably have to fill in all kinds of weird forms.
Yeah, they're a funny country.
And
a great country. We had a great year there, but the government is they've got some things to work out.
They've got some big problems, yeah. And how about the kind of practical things like being able to get things sent to you and renew your credit cards and all of that kind of stuff? Are you finding that these types of issues a practical barrier? Or?
No, not at all. First of all, one of the reasons for that for our family is we're now minimalists. Not in any ideology kind of way. It's just we've gone from having all that stuff to having 8 checked bags and 4 carry-ons. We're not sending crates or anything like that from country to country. So we have a pretty simple life, and so we don't desire... we live in nice places, but we just don't desire to accumulate lots of things. Those things that we do want to accumulate, if they're not available in the international community, which most things are these days, then we can get them from the United States, and you develop habits and practices where you have somebody who's coming to visit you, so you have things shipped to them for the 2 months prior, and they bring an extra bag with them. Or if you need to, you can, of course, have things shipped internationally, and that system works fairly well, but subject to customs in the country that you're living in.
Right. Well, just to...
Oh, and then just from a broader perspective on your question, in many ways, the logistics of life have gotten easier. We are entirely digital. We don't get our mail anymore. It's scanned in by a scanning service, and I'll never go back.
Right.
Even when I live in the United States, I'll keep a service like that. And we don't use checks because checks seem to be fairly unique to the U.S., at least so far from our experience. And most credit card companies will send your credit card internationally.
Yeah.
So, no, I would say there's not a lot of logistical hassle associated with being far from our country of origin.
Well, I think that's awesome, and I really I think the minimalist lifestyle is definitely the way that we're going as well. I'm finding it incredibly rewarding. It actually sort of just feels like a breath of fresh air not to have as many possessions to have to think about and look after, you know. So I completely understand where you're coming from on that front.
Yeah, it's amazing to not need stuff. I just have no desire anymore to buy things.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, you know, for this lifestyle, which I think is a really interesting one for a lot of people, what have been a couple of the sort of let's just say, can you think of one of your best and one of your worst experiences that have come from your life as a permanent traveler in the last few years? What's been the best thing that has happened one of the best things that have happened to you having come from that choice? And also, you know, one of maybe the bad things, because I think that's kind of helpful for people to get a sense of what the experience is like.
Yeah, I've got the best. I just figured out what the best is. And it's not any one thing. Loved Machu Picchu, loved taking my younger son to Ireland for 3 weeks. Lots of great memories and experiences. But the thing that is the greatest reward from our life abroad is a psychological one. And it's related to your show. It's related to why I enjoy listening to your episodes. We're all learning just how unfree we were in the U.S. Mm. And I don't mean to bash the U.S. U.S. is a great country in so many ways, but how unfree we are probably everywhere in the world. Every country's probably got its own version of the assembly line, and we're all brainwashed into the groupthink of the country we're from. And being away from that and being in different places has really challenged our paradigms and allowed us to relearn things that we didn't even know we had learned. Mm. And so that psychological shift just gives me so much more peace in my life, because I am not being a packaged version of myself that I'm not even sure is myself. Mm. I'm now learning to be me, and I'm learning who I am and how I operate without the rule book that I was given.
Awesome. That's the good experience. Yeah. I think that's great. How about the bad one?
All right. Give me a moment to see if I can grab something from my memory. Well, very shortly after arriving in Argentina, a country where we didn't speak the language, at least no one in the family. I spoke a little from my high school days of Spanish. But in the first week, my older son ate something that he was allergic to, and he has severe allergies to a couple of things, and he accidentally ate one, part because we didn't recognize it, and part because we couldn't read the ingredients on the packaging. So that's how it happened, and that's, being an international family is to blame for that. Getting him to a hospital was a challenge, and being in the hospital, looking around at a place that was so alien and so foreign, it looked more like movies that I've seen, war-torn movies and hospitals that I've seen in those films, than anything I had ever seen. And trying to just communicate to the hospital staff was a significant challenge. They turned out to be quite competent. And as we later came to learn, the hospital facilities are pretty awful, but the doctors are actually very skilled doctors. They have a good program in Argentina for training medical professionals. But it was a scare, and it was a challenge, and I think one that was relevant to our being international and in a foreign land.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I can imagine how scary that must have been. Did you, what do you think about that experience, sort of reflecting back on it now and thinking about, the life that you've chosen? Is it something, what do you think people can take from the experiences that you've had?
They could take how irresponsible this family is for bringing their kids into an unknown world. It's not what we take from it, but they could. We take from it what we knew was going to be the case, that we were going to face new types of challenges and new types of opportunities and new growth, and that is part of the journey, and that's part of the stories we have to tell and the rich memories we're accumulating and the appreciation of when we're making it work.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think that's really, really helpful, and it's been great hearing about your experiences, David. And I want to make sure for people who are interested in finding out more about you or contacting you, where can they find you on the internet?
So, as my business is, we're going to be building a new website for the new brand, but the website that we're currently on is www.akaes.com. Of course, if anybody does need Microsoft Dynamics solutions in their business, I would love to hear from you. Me personally, if anybody cares to, you can connect to my blog, which is FamilyKahn, KAHN.wordpress.com. And I'm going to, and I'll give out an email that I made specifically for this show. I own the domain sendshere.com, so I put in place voluntary life at sendshere.com, and I'll get anything and I'll know where it came from.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the show, David.
Jake, I got a real kick out of it. Thank you so much, and I look forward to listening to this episode.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.